Hey, Jay.
Hey, Melba.
Hopefully your weekend was okay.
You know what? Thankfully, very uneventful.
uh, that's what I wish for every weekend,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, not saying that be careful what you wish for thing, although I can imagine having a family and people running around, kids needing things to do and all that kind of stuff can get a little daunting. Not saying that I don't want that because I absolutely do, but like I said, be careful what you wish for, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's just been too eventful in my house the past couple of weeks, so I need some downtime.
Is that Dr. David Wheeler?
It's true. I have returned from vacation.
Jesus, it's been like almost 2 months. What?
Really? Well,
Yeah,
I decided to take a vacation. I don't do that very often. So it was a very strange experience. Not only a vacation, but was disconnected from the internet for a while. Boy, that's strange.
Yeah, sometimes
it turns out there's a world out there. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? See, when you disappear, you create such a big hole, it feels like it's been months.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your kind words.
You're welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think today is going to be email day. Actually, all days are email days.
Yeah.
I don't see Mark. I was assuming he'd be here.
Yeah, I don't see him either. He is online, so maybe he's just running late. I know Josh can't make it.
Josh Mulligan? I see him here.
No. Joshua Locke.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No problems. Turns out there's a lot of David, so I used my middle initial because there's a lot of David Wheelers, it turns out, to the horror of everyone across the world.
When I was hired into my team, they told me, be glad your name isn't Chris, because we probably wouldn't have been able to hire you because there was too many Chris's on the team.
And there's Mark. Hey there.
Hey.
We were missing you already.
I know, my presence. No one can go without it.
We do want you. Everyone could deal without me though, because I managed to take a vacation. It's very strange. I'm not used to those.
Nice. I know Joshua and Michael said they couldn't be here today. I don't know about others. Looks like we have folks. Let me open up the meeting notes.
Today's the 23rd. And actually, make sure my name gets in here.
Put the meeting notes in chat for anyone who needs it. As a reminder, please record your attendance in the meeting notes and that we're going to abide by the Linux Foundation Code of Conduct. Is there, so see, welcome newcomers. Is there anyone here who hasn't participated before? No, okay. Yeah, I recognize that. All right. So I can give a brief update on the provenance spec. I think actually a lot of the people here have in fact reviewed the provenance spec. I submitted an initial draft of the V1 provenance spec. I tried to mark with the RFC, if you search for RFC, cases where there's like significant disagreement or places where we're particularly looking for comments. The biggest one is how we record external parameters. Right now, it's a bit awkward if you follow that conversation on the thread. And so I'm putting together a pull request right now that basically allows just an arbitrary JSON object as a parameter. Kind of shifts around how we do like the recording of the digest piece. I'm still putting it together, so I won't bother explaining it like a half-baked idea now. But I'd be interested for folks to kind of like maybe put together one like by hand, or think about like how would I actually record a real world thing? Because I think that's really what's going to tell us whether it's good or not, is when people actually go to try to implement it. Like, oh, this is awkward. Here's the rough edges. And I'll try to do the same thing for like ones internally at Google, to know, like, because we have like about like half a dozen different build systems internally that we have provenance for in our own internal format. And then I could try convert. Actually, I think it's also provenance one format. And then I could try converting it to this new format and see, you know, how well the concepts translate. Any other comments on provenance?
Is the expectation that you have to use this to claim SLSA compliance, or is this
No, in this spec we say that this is the recommended format, and in the 0.1 version of the SLSA requirements, we had kind of like a dual list. In the requirements, there was the abstract list of things you do, and in the provenance format, the concrete ways that you could record it, and like the reader had to kind of mentally map back and forth. So in the current draft, this requirements just say either use SLSA provenance or something equivalent. And in the provenance thing, it says like this is required and here's the guidance. And so if you're using a different format, I'm hoping that like the reader can just like translate internally. Mm-hmm. You know, and say like, oh, well, we don't, you know, use this other format for whatever reason, rather than kind of trying to like do everything twice. What else is going on? There's open pull requests for verification. Where are they right now?
Yes, Chris and I are working on those. We'll talk about that next week in this meeting. I want to touch base with him one more time and kind of get everything pulled together before we kind of do a presentation. So shouldn't take too long in the next meeting, but do review that pull request. That'll be super useful. We're going to work on a machine readable version / kind of fillable version of the verification for build systems work. So please do help review that if you have time.
Yeah. I think I'm meeting with Chris later today. Yeah, in that piece, it wasn't clear to me like the role of attestations there, and that's probably something we should all talk about. You know, like an attestation for an artifact, I think we're all clear on, because like an artifact has a digest and we have a provenance for that. I think what is probably less widely agreed upon is having like an attestation for a whole build system. Like one organization would certify GitHub Actions or Google Cloud Build or Circle CI or whatever. At least in some configuration meets something. I could see that having value. It's less clear to me that it should be a requirement or exactly how that works. So I think we have to maybe figure out like what the balance to strike there is.
Yeah, well, we're kind of thinking of it as where the idea is that some things you cannot verify from a user point of view out of a builder. You kind of have to trust to some extent a builder. So in that process, we're trying to think of how a builder would state, hey, this is why you should trust us when we say we have produced a certain level of artifact. We've produced a build and it satisfies these requirements, right? And so as part of like SLSA verifier, as long as you trust that builder, then it can kind of pass some basic checks. So that's what the general outline of what we're thinking. But it is kind of a difficult, where would that go and what would it look like and all of that stuff, and what needs to be manual and what can be automatic is another question. So yeah, I'm talking with him later this week. So if you have any particular concerns, please do bring them up. I know you said you're talking to him. If you can address them with him, and then we can talk about it and kind of further that progress.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, you can attest some build properties by doing a verified reproducible build. If you're trying to attest that something's secret, that's not going to do it. But and I realize that that's not a requirement for SLSA, at least the SLSA 1 through 3 that we're working on.
Yeah. Ideally, like a reproducible build system could be one way to satisfy it.
Right. Right. I mean, that's, if you're worried that the build itself is subverted, your options are few for countering that.
Yeah, I think that's just that level of assurance and trust that we're talking about, is like, if a build system, like if a build system provider has said we follow these best practices that we've kind of laid out as part of SLSA spec, right, then a user can say, well, if GitHub says they did this and that or the other, or Circle CI or Google Cloud Builder, if they say they've done these things, then I'm reasonably confident in these other things, right? So that's kind of the direction.
I guess the other major thing in the spec space would be cleaning up. There's like a bunch of to-dos and open references. So if anyone, feel free to grab. Again, we still have that project board. Where is it? Let me find the link to it. Projects specification 1.0. Yeah, put it in the chat. That there's like kind of open issues that I'm not sure have been decided. I think we might be able to fold some of those in. Arno?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to follow up on the conformance aspect. I get the feeling we're mixing two different concepts in this. There is the notion of conformance is one thing, and the notion of certification is another. And this seems to be mixing both into one thing called conformance. And so typically in a standard, in the specification, it is said somewhere, well, this is what it means to be conformant or compliant to this specification. It basically says you must, actually implement all the must statements and requirements. And then how this is assessed, right, is a different story altogether. I don't know why we go into the notion of having possible third parties, auditors into discussing conformance. This is, now there is this notion that some people are going to claim conformance, and whether you trust it or not is, an interesting question that is typically addressed through certification or self-certification or third-party certification. But it's a bit, there's a nuance there that I don't see here. And I have to admit, it kind of escaped me initially because I read conformance and I didn't think, I thought when I read the text, there was another Google Doc I commented on, which which read actually like certification program to me. And I didn't realize it was called conformance program. And then I was told about, oh, there's a conformance program. And I was like, what is that? And I realized, oh, it's really a certification program called conformance program. And so I think we need to be a bit careful how we call things, because it might also, I mean, admittedly, you know, not everybody is like me, but for those of us who have a background in standards, might get a bit confused by that.
Should we modify the semantics to be certification program?
Yeah, but the question is, should it be in the spec? I don't think so. I think it's an important topic, but it should not be put into the spec. I think the spec needs to focus on defining what it means to be conformant. And especially, I mean, if you think in terms of like the web, right? If you were to write a spec about like, you know, there's often a notion of there are different actors that can implement, just like here, we have producers and consumers, and we may want to define what it is to be conformant to SLSA if you're a producer of artifacts, what it is to be conformant if you are a consumer of artifacts. But this is again, and that should belong in the spec. Then, you know, we should have, aside from the spec, you know, define a certification program if you choose to do that, that can go into the details of, you know, who assess the conformance. And how.
So clearly it should go like on the site somewhere, I think you're saying.
Yes.
And I think we want to communicate that this certification program, if we switch to the wording, certification program exists, and like to the, even if it's not an external, like it's just like self-claimed or whatever, that whole notion of like how that works. I think that's a big question that people have right now, is like how that works. Is it, are you saying like literally just so it's, you know, like right now in the menu we have, based on your pull request from today, like the SLSA and then attestations, and then there'd be like another one of like certification? Is that
I don't think it's a spec. That's why I don't think it belongs in the specifications. It's something else. There's a certification program which is on its own. I don't think it's a specification.
Well, so like, so I think
specification for me, just to be clear, I mean, you know, a specification is something that you implement and you can claim compliance to and achieve some kind of goal of typically interoperability, which is what we're doing with SLSA, right?
So I think maybe some two challenges here. One is that, you know, it, as opposed to like a protocol or a program or a format, like there's like a right and a wrong, like things could actually operate. Whereas here, sure, like you could just do this and it could just not be true, and there's no way of knowing like that it happened or not, I guess. So for example, if like, I won't use a real world example, like Foo Build Service, Awesome Build Service, claims that they're doing something, but they just don't. Like they say we're SLSA 3, things would continue to work. It just would not be secure. So it's a, yes, it's a little bit different, where at least it feels to me like there's some challenge there, because you can't just have another implementation, see if it works in practice.
But so let's be very pragmatic, I mean, or practical. We have colleagues in IBM who are working on a product that implements you know, a pipeline, and they want to produce SLSA provenance, and they are asking, okay, what is it going to take for me to be compliant with SLSA and to be able to say we are conformant, right? And the answer ought to be, okay, you have to do all these musts that are in the SLSA spec as a producer of artifacts. And you know, then they can implement it, and they can go around and claim, hey, we implemented it, right? And then people are free to agree or disagree, believe it or not, trust it or not. And then you can say, okay, but now we have too many people who are claiming left and right they are compliant when they may be not. So then we put a certification program in place that will actually look into this. And, you know, there are certain tests that can be run. And again, there are different ways to run it, whether it's a self attestation, certification, or it's a third party or whatnot. There can be requirements set up to define what it means to be able to certify. But this is a different thing altogether, right? I mean,
what, like, so let's take the world like before you get into the certification program. It's really just people claiming stuff. In that world, would that be entirely within the spec? Like, because I think something needs to describe like how the overall thing works, that like a verifier
yeah.
exists and it has a pre-configured list of what services trusted at what level, and there's some process that someone makes a decision that a particular builder is at a level and they have to go on some list. It seems like that should be described somewhere in the spec.
Yes. So, but again, I think this is you have to describe what it takes to be able to claim conformance.
Yeah.
How you verify the claim, maybe that's a different story altogether, right? That this is where you get into this certification aspect.
Yeah, I've been involved in a number of certification efforts in the past, both security and not security, and typically they are treated separately. You know, if you've got, well, let's start with the non-security example. That's probably easier. You know, a number of programming languages have specs. You know, C or Ada or whatever. You know, here's the spec. Here's what the language is. You know, you do these things to implement a compiler. There may or may not be a conformance test suite or verification process. Not all compilers go through, even when they exist, not all compilers necessarily go through it. That's considered separate. On the other hand, you do get stronger assurance when they go, if they do go through that, hopefully, that it's actually doing the right thing. From the security world, I spent way too much time on I spent a significant amount of time with the common criteria, where they actually do have that separation of, here are the things you have to do to make certain claims, and at least originally they had levels. And then separately, you can go through a process for verification. I will say one of the things that really hurt the common criteria was the costs to do that the validation costs were borne by, in their case, by the software maker. And 6-digit, 7-digit prices to get a document is that takes many months to get through, and it's not clear that many people actually want or care, is kind of a problem. So there's always, so I think it's important to separate what is it required to meet a certain level versus the effort to determine whether or not that statement is true. And
Exactly.
and also you have to balance, like everything else, the costs and benefits, because if it costs too much to do that verification, people will eventually decide this is not worth it. Done, Mark?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to summarize what you just said.
If you want, I can try to type in something, because I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, other specs work. Yeah, so I totally, okay. So I agree that having the actual certification process be separate, like, at first there's self-certification and you could have maybe some independent bodies do something or other. That I can see that clearly being separate. What is not clear to me is two things. One, the just the overall description, the picture that like, a software producer makes something and they use a build service, because there could be multiple software producers all using the same build service. The build service generates provenance, and then some consumer, some downstream system verifies the provenance and maps the builder's identity to a software, to a level. And how that mapping takes place and is configured, and like under what, how that works, that feels like that part like should be part of the spec, because that's how it works, independent of like the actual certification process. But just like the fact of that happening, I would think maybe. And then so,
Yeah.
and the second thing is the verifying systems thing that Chris just posted, that thing was submitted. One of the things that we chose to do for 1.0 is not have a list of criteria for what conformance is, for how secure a build service needs to be. I think we punted on that of like, there exists tons of those things of like, how do you define a secure system? Like you're going to have like a NIST 1,000-page document, because like securing systems is really, really hard. And we're probably not going to, break any new ground there. But instead, the idea is to have this kind of survey or document or something like that to just kind of explain, to convince the reader why they should be secure. And that could either, a consumer could just read that directly and be like, okay, so-and-so says this, I'll add them to my level 1 list. Or if some body uses that as part of a formal certification process. So anyway, that's where I'm kind of struggling with, in terms of like what's in spec and what's not. Sorry for talking so long, Jay.
Yeah, so one word that I didn't hear, and I think it's a caveat to what everyone is saying, and I think if we said this one word and then built some structure around it, we may be able to squeeze both sides against the middle. David was alluding to this. There's a certification process, and then there's an accreditation process. When you go through the accreditation process, the accreditation process is like it's sort of like certifying conformity, right? So this is to Arno's point, and this is to David's point too, especially when you're considering security perspective versus non-security perspective, and you see this every which way from Sunday. For example, in the military, right, and you'll have what's called a golden master. Right, and then you have this golden master, and this could be a derivative of whatever operating system that they bring in, but they take some stuff out, they cut the fat, they put some other stuff in that's proprietary, and then that's your golden master. But you go through a certification process that everything that's there, it's supposed to be there, and then an independent third party comes behind you and accredits, first of all, your certification process, right, and then says, based on the accreditation of your certification process, we can say that your golden master is indeed what it's supposed to be, because you guys have gone through the process of using that certification process. And we said that based on our accreditation of that process, that you have conformed to the process therein. So I think if we take that one word, accreditation, bake that in somewhere, I think that that as far as SLSA is concerned, you absolutely can have certification, which can be, you could do a self-attestation, you could even have an audit team somewhere internally say, hey, yeah, we can come in based on your self-attestation, take that stuff in and say, hey, yeah, you follow this, yeah, your SLSA level, this and that other. But then we can have an independent third party who gets plus up. I mean, these are all aspirational, right? But then that can come in and say, we can accredit the process you used for certifying conformity. I said a lot of damn words, but I think the difference between certification and accreditation lives here. And I think if we parse those out and then build structure around them, conversation will be a lot more fluid. I'll end there.
Yeah, at least under NIST, they define those certification versus accreditation a little differently. I stuck that in the notes. I'm not. We're not going to solve the problem that people use the same words to mean different things. But whatever we mean, we should define them clearly.
It sounded to me like the NIST
Exactly.
definition agreed with Jay. No?
Yeah, I put in. Okay, so at least under NIST, certification is for verifying either people have adequate credentials or that products meet certain requirements. Which is I think what we were primarily talking about, which is why I've been using the word certification. Under NIST, accreditation is more about that. Hey, they've got a lab, they meet certain calibrations and so on. I don't think that we're doing that, although maybe we will. I don't know. Which is I don't know. I seem like there's a difference, but I'm not sure I can verbalize that difference. Jay, and if
Yeah,
I'm all washed
you
up,
have
please do.
you'll have NIST standards, but I think with respect to builds and respect to the security in general, there is a clear clear definition of what accreditation is, and it is you are looking at conformity. You're looking at whether or not there's conformity against a recognized standard, right? So how well you conformed to the certification process, right? So there's a certification process. There's a spec, and then you're going through the certification process based on that spec, but then now you're accrediting the process you used, right? So now we're talking, and it's not different than what you just said, right? But
Okay.
take in the steps you took to certify against the spec. Now you're accrediting the steps you took and the measure and whether or not you conform to it correctly. And sometimes that's very important, because then two different organizations can certify differently and maybe come to the same conclusion, or they will come to a different conclusion. But the steps may on face may look a little different. But if you come in with a third party and say, can we accredit the steps used, they may have missed something, right? Or they may not have taken enough time on something, or the documentation might look different. Anything, right? But I think that gets a little rigid. That gets a little bit more rigid than maybe it needs to be. But there is a clear, certification versus accreditation process. I'll stop there though. Joshua has something he wants to say too. I'll put my hand down.
Yeah, I think going back to the kind of original issue that we're trying to figure out is for spec B 1.0. I definitely think I agree with Mark on we want some sort of bridge between whatever future certification process looks like, whatever that looks like in the future. We need some sort of bridge between that and the spec. I firmly believe we have to have some sort of bridge there, whether it's a builder sticks another attestation in there that says, hey, here is our how we have figured out that we're level 3, and they sign that attestation or something along those lines, so that a user can trust a builder from that perspective. So I feel like we have to have a bridge from the spec to the certification at some point, so that people, like you said, don't go around and claim SLSA level X without any proof, right? And kind of dilute the trademark to some extent, because we want it to be a valuable tool for people to use. So we can't really let people go and dilute the name. So we need that bridge. I don't know what that looks like, and then we need to have them aligned for the 1.0 release. Whether we need to change the terms from conformance to certification, I think that's fine, as long as we define everything appropriately. So we just need to, I guess, from my point of view, because I'm working with Chris on this, I would love to know where this stuff needs to live. Do we need to move things out of the spec folder on the website and create something new, a certification header on the website, or what do we need to do in order to kind of move forward on providing providing users basically the information they need to evaluate their builders when they're trying to select, you know, either who to use or who to trust or anything like that.
So let me ask a clarification question, and I apologize if I'm showing my ignorance here, but you know, we're not talking about adding some kind of digital signature that is discoverable by the consumer, right? Because then that would justify adding it, in my opinion, into the spec. Is like, you know, you say, oh, the producer attests those things and they claim compliance, and this is something that is signed by some kind of, you know, additional certifier / auditor or whatever you call it. But
I think in the future that might be very
valuable.
valuable, right? Is to have, it might be very valuable to have some auditors trusted that are vetted or accredited by the OpenSSF, that then as part of tooling, you know, we can automatically trust them, right? That would be super awesome if down the road a user can automatically trust what a builder said because it was audited to a certain level by an accredited auditor, right? That would be awesome. So I think that's kind of one bridge, but then the other bridge is like, if I'm running the verifier tool, can I add in my CLI -- trust keys, and I trust a builder key, and therefore everything works out fine and I get my green check mark? Or can I say, I trust, you know, I trust GitHub, I trust Google, I trust, you know, several different groups and not have to put in a key? You know, how does that look from a user interface perspective? How does that bridge is part of the question.
And this is maybe something we should discuss. In my mind, I was thinking that I'm trying to figure out the right words. Conformance does not require such a signature type of thing. Like if you have a pre-configured list of like these public keys or PKI, whatever, identities map to these SLSA levels, and that would be sufficient to meet SLSA, and that you don't need this more complicated like signing of that list. It sounds like such a thing could be useful, and that would almost be like a separate spec for how that would work, I guess. But anyway, that's what I was thinking, because like, you know, for example, within Google, we don't have, like, we've been doing this for a while and we've been implementing this, but we don't have such a signature thing. And I don't think we should be like not called SLSA because we're not implementing that kind of like meta signing thing. And similar for other organizations, like it seems like one possible way to implement, but doesn't seem like the only way.
No, but I agree. And you know, following up on what Josh was talking about, I think it could be useful to have that maybe at some point, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing that this was already the case. So you're saying no. So therefore, I mean, you know, I'll take the action item to have another look at the conformance PR with that specifically in mind, trying to, but for me, as I think David articulated pretty well, there's this, you know, conformance when it comes to the spec should be limited to what it means to be for an implementation, whether it's a, you know, producer, consumer, but you know, what it means to be compliant with the spec, not how this is being assessed or by whom. And the certification, you know, should be separated from the spec, and it's this notion of, you know, how do you make this assessment whether somebody is entitled to make these claims about compliance or conformance with the SLSA spec, and at what level.
So yeah, I appreciate you taking a look. And it's in particular the verifying.
I actually looked at it, but I was a bit, you know, it was a bit difficult for me to wrap my head around it because of that. I was like, why are we talking about auditors and things like this in there? it seems like this is outside the spec, but
Yeah.
I'm happy
So,
to have a look and try to be more constructive and come up with some proposal that I think would make things clearer.
yeah. And the verifying build system thing is already submitted. And so, we could move that, of course. One thing maybe to keep in mind, or like the question maybe to try to answer is there, what I had been thinking, but now I'm starting to doubt it based on this conversation, is that there's a requirement essentially to publish such information that you would need to like make some effort to explain to people why you should be trusted to be this level. The process by which someone makes that decision maybe would not be part of the spec, but just like, yeah, but maybe that should all move to the conformance thing. I don't know. The other thing is that like, it seems like ideally we would have something in the requirements for like how secure it is, right? Of like, you don't want just an entirely insecure, like if I just run a random machine that's like unpatched, I don't do any security, I do terrible authentication, I do like all the stuff wrong. But I technically meet all the check boxes of like, I do some sort of isolation and I do, like, is that SLSA 3? It feels like it should be a no, but it's almost like a different level. And so originally we had put like a to-do of like defining what those requirements are. And then we just said, it's impossible to come up with an actual thing because people do checklists and you could always make an insecure system that meets all the checkboxes. Yeah, so like, I don't know how to kind of resolve that.
I understand that. That's a hard problem. I mean, it's what you were saying earlier, how do you define the platform is secure? Well, good luck.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think a lot of organizations are asking this question of how, when spec 1.0 comes out, they want to know how they can go and say, hey, consumers, hey, our customers, hey, other people, we are level 3, but as an organization, the question for us is, where do we want our trademark used? And what requirements do we want to put in place before we let anyone go and say that? So we need to figure that out before V1. Otherwise, we're going to be in a world of mess. And I don't know exactly how. It seems like there's a lot of questions about how that's going to happen right this moment.
Yeah. If you have no requirements, though, the solution will be there will be no requirements, Mark.
No, but yeah, that on that front. But no, but Joshua, I agree with you. This is a very good point, and this is what certification programs are exactly for. You have one in CNCF, and people claim compliance, and then they are being challenged, and there is a bunch of tests and stuff, and there's like it's actually a self certification program, but there are different ways you can do it. And that's totally reasonable, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. By the way, I pointed out in the Google Doc as a comment that those things do require resources, right, to be done right. Because it's not a one-time thing. It's like every time a vendor says, hey, we want to be certified, they have a web page that lists all the vendors with their offerings. And there's somebody at the Linux Foundation, the CNCF, that has for job to ping those people every 6 months or so and say, hey, I saw you released so many new versions of your product. Are you sure you're still compliant? If you do, you have to, file an application, and they have to keep it maintained all the time, because otherwise things become obsolete and they still remain there. So.
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff is very valuable. I'm not disputing this at all. I'm just saying it belongs next to the spec, not in the spec.
So what about the issue of like the unstated thing of like the build system ought to be secure, for some fuzzy definition of secure? Would that, any thoughts on like, would that go in requirements or in conformance, or just absent and we just say SLSA makes no claim about that?
This is hard. It comes down to, now it's not, it comes down to what is it that you require to be compliant with the SLSA spec, right? And indeed, there are some kind of assumption there, and there may be requirements that are more qualitative than anything else, and you cannot necessarily easily test, and that you're just going to try to formalize in some kind of way to say, well, yeah, things should be up to date with the latest patches and not have like obsolete code in it and so on. But I think the requirements of the work that you did on the must and should and may, this is very much working in what it means to define the conformance to the spec. And I think that's you need more of that, but it's in the right track.
So maybe as a next step, actually, certainly, welcome anyone else who hasn't spoken up yet. Maybe as a next step, Joshua and Chris could think about maybe splitting it out. And Arno, if you have ideas on how to do that too, or certainly anyone else. So maybe that would be like in terms of the way we organize, we have the spec itself and attestations, and then this would be like a separate thing like certification. And maybe there's some references in the text, because like if you're reading it, you want some sort of link of like to know it's coming, because if you don't know it exists, you'll never know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That makes total sense to me. I imagine it being a separate, like, I don't know, maybe it's they kind of align to the spec pretty tightly, because obviously you're wanting to certify conformance to the spec. So it might be in the same like folder in the code, and it might be, kind of close to it, but not in it, if that makes sense.
I know, but Mark is right. I mean, we have, and so I actually haven't seen this because it's not been merged yet, but if it's approved by another and merged, I actually reorganized a little bit the specifications menu to separate SLSA from the attestation specs and the stages spec page, and I can see how certification would be there, or conformance, if you want to call it that way, but
okay.
So I agree, we could definitely keep it close to the spec, and we can have the spec have a reference to that page. There's no problem there at all.
Can you post the PR for the reorganization? I think that would be really useful to look at.
Yeah, it is there. It's called, I don't know.
Is it 52? I mean, 72, 572?
Sorry, I got lost on my way to pull request. 575.
575. All right. Awesome. I'll drop that in here.
I mean, I think it's historical, and that the specification menu kind of shows its age, and I try to separate the SLSA spec from the rest, because I mean, maybe I'm old school, but I'm trying to think in blocks. Like, okay, there is something we want to call the SLSA specification, and in practice, in the repo, we have a folder for that. And the menu does not reflect it. So I try to reorganize it to encapsulate all of those into one block in a sub menu under the specifications menu. Mark seems to have liked it. So if others do, and like I said, we could have another item on the other end for the certification or conformance section.
Would it be called certification or conformance?
That is the $1 million question.
I'll have again another look at I think the conformance section, there should be a conformance section in the spec, that says what it means to be, what it takes to be conformant. And then there should be a certification page that talks about how do we verify those conformance claims by different implementers. And if they're auditors, third parties and not, which is what I think this is about.
So we currently have the requirements page. Is that the same as the conformance page, or would that be something else?
So the requirements definitely is very strongly tied to this. The question, and actually I think it might be all in there. This is something I looked at this weekend a little at some point, and I was trying to figure this out, whether we needed a conformance section exactly separated on that or not. But I don't think so, because we already have the reference to the definition, the formal definition of must, and that pretty much encapsulates it.
So maybe
You
we
could
can
have a
say something
generic
like,
conformance section that says, to be compliant or conformant to the spec, you must implement all the must, but it's kind of built into the use of the must with the RFC. So I don't
yeah,
think
so if we have the requirements and we say something along the lines of like, satisfaction of these requirements will constitute conformance with SLSA level 3 or something like that. Please see this page for details on who has been certified to meet these requirements, something like that. Would that make sense?
yes, I think that could be totally, that would make sense.
Perfect. Yeah, Christopher, that's exactly what the conformance program kind of is addressing, those two different levels. But since we already got SLSA levels in the Google Doc for the conformance program, if you look at that, we actually called them tiers. I don't know if that's something that we'll want to keep around or kind of how we'll talk about them in the future, but thinking about the self-attested is kind of that minimum viable product that we're thinking for V1. And then as time goes on, if we can get funding or set up some sort of structure where obviously the whatever the certification program or if there's a third party like auditor, what was the term that we were using earlier, Jay, that you mentioned? Accreditation, if we have an accreditation program, that kind of will come along later to fill that gap of that higher level of assurance, hopefully.
Yeah, I feel like I think I just want to make sure supposed to make sure we're on the same page. I don't think we want to block 1.0 on an actual formal certification program. Like self-certification will be what we have at
Yes.
when we release 1.0.
On the 0, yeah.
Yeah, and so like, yeah, I think that just needs to be made clear that basically, you kind of, I think we want some sort of guidelines of like, this is how you self-certify, and here's how people can know whether or not to trust that self-certification.
Yeah, that's the thought on the registry. And I like if we split the spec from the certification, and with V1, we have self-certification with a registry that can be filled over time. That would provide that location where users can get information and evaluate whether or not they trust a builder or not. I think that would be high value. And since if they're split, then we don't have to wait on the registry being updated. I mean, the spec being updated to add additional self-certifications to a sort of registry as well. So I think that's a decent direction to take it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And it also solves the problem where I said, like, I don't think an organization that does SLSA internally, just like privately for their own purposes, should not be called SLSA because they don't do this. I think by splitting out certification, that would solve that problem, right? Because it's no longer part of the requirements.
Yeah, for sure. Now, obviously, if you have your own builder and you produce your own software, then you are kind of you're self-certifying at some point. And so, hey, my build is SLSA level 3 if you trust me, right?
Not necessarily. You can easily build yourself and have a third party come in and audit.
Yeah, yeah, that would be that higher level of assurance.
Yeah.
But you might not want to, if you are vertically integrated in that way, you might not want to publish details about your builder publicly on something like a registry. So separating out the spec makes sense for that, because then you can still produce SLSA level X, artifacts without having to produce anything else for your builder that you use.
You know what? You just mentioned the word that Mark mentioned earlier, publish. And I'm wondering maybe we need to tease that a little bit. I think it's important to write down somewhere, here's what we did. I think for an open source project, there's really no reason not to publish it. But I think if you're talking about proprietary vendors, you could easily talk about, yes, they've documented it, but we don't publish it publicly. If you want access to that, either you have to be a customer or maybe you have to sign some NDA or something. So that it exists, but that doesn't make it necessarily public.
I was imagining that self-certification, some details would have to be public, right?
Public or available to the potential consumers.
I guess available to whoever would want to verify the provenance.
Okay. Because a lot of products are very specific. Like, if you're building a transformer, I mean, a physical transformer, not a software thing. The list of people who want to buy it is a relatively small list. You may not want to make that public. You maybe only want to make that to potential buyers.
Yeah, I guess I would want the information to be available to whoever's consuming the product of the build system, right? And so if that's one of those situations where, I'm consuming provenance from X vendor and they don't publish their thing, publicly about their build systems, but I can get access to it, privately because I'm one of their 5 customers in the world, then that would make sense. But
I would tweak it a little bit. Customers and potential customers, because this is presumably one of the reasons you'll make a decision on whether or not you want to buy the product.
Yeah. I was thinking for a lot of the major builder solutions, they would want some information to be public, and we would want some information to be public because all of open source uses a selection of these builders, and so that's why I was thinking a public registry that at least links to where you can get access to some of this information. It says, hey, if you want to know how GitHub manages the security of their builder, then here's a link to their documentation. And maybe you have to sign in, maybe you have to sign an NDA to fully read it. But at the end of the day, there's a pointer that says, over here is where you can find the information you want.
So I put a link to the CNCF conformance page for Kubernetes. And you do have to scroll through this because how it works is at the very end, after all the logos, and that actually points to all the products that claim compliance, right? And so this is very public. It's some kind of registry, just like you were talking about, of people who claim compliance for the offerings. And they do use that as a bragging right, right? This is what motivates them to do so, because potential buyers might look at this and say, oh, yeah, they actually are listed. Gives them some kind of reassurance.
I like that. And also, as we build out that kind of audited certification, that would be a benefit of that would be that, well, maybe not as much stuff needs to be public to convince your customers that you're trustworthy, right? Because you have a third party who's attesting to it. So that would let you keep more details private. So that's something that some of those institutions will want to take advantage of, and just because they have secret sauce that they got to protect, or whatever. But I don't really believe in the secret sauce stuff, but that's a personal issue of mine.
Yeah, there are believers in the secret sauce. I think you're generally right. Almost never is the secret sauce actually secret. But there are people who believe in the illusion.
Yeah. information wants to be free.
All right, so I feel like this was pretty productive. All right, so we know what next steps are. Arno, Joshua, and Chris, I think, have an idea to kind of work together to come up with some alternative. And it sounds promising. So great. All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
We'll probably talk online and through for requests and chat and things like that, or see you next week. All right, bye everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.